everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're Performance Agile. I'm Eric.
And I'm Vince.
And today we're talking extreme programming.
So today we're talking about extreme programming. And a lot of this is really targeted at engineers and engineering. So today's quote goes like this. To the optimist, the glass is half full. To the pessimist, the glass is half empty. To the engineer, the glass is twice as big as it needs to be. And that author, unfortunately, is unknown, but it's a good one.
As we've talked in our past videos about Scrum and Kanban being frameworks in the sense of they set boundaries for which the teams are set to engage in, XP tries to put a little bit of emphasis down on the team of how the work should be done. So this is not a framework in the sense that Scrum is a framework or Kanban is a flow of how work moves through a system. We are now saying, hey team, we want you to do test-driven development. We want you to use story points. We want you to use user stories. Now we're starting to define how the team gets work done.
Yeah, so I don't think it's just my opinion. I think it's a widely recognized opinion that, regardless of Scrum or Kanban, all of the industry best practices with regard to the engineering part of all of these frameworks, it's all rooted in XP.
Yeah, and when you talk about false attribution, there's a lot of individuals who say we are Scrum because we do stand-ups and we use user stories. Well, that would be you're using Scrum and XP. You're using a hybrid of the two, because I don't know where that came about of how XP practices became attributed to Scrum, probably just teams blending the work together over the years. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason why Scrum and XP are so closely related, because of who signed the Agile Manifesto.
Well, so
we got to talk about who's behind XP and who's behind Scrum for maybe that sheds some light on it.
Yeah, so the folks that created, if you will, both XP and Scrum were signers of the Agile Manifesto.
Right.
And so there's two gentlemen that are credited with really, coming up with Scrum. There are several people who are attributed to basically making XP what we all know and love today.
So who's Scrum?
So it's Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber.
Yep.
And so on the XP side, a lot of names like Kent Beck, often comes to the forefront of the, who really came up with extreme programming.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's other folks. So, these guys all came together at Chrysler as part of what they called the C3 program then, which is a Chrysler
comprehensive
compensation program, right? And so they were experimenting with how to overcome some of the challenges at Chrysler, and so Kent Beck, Ron Jeffries, Don Ward, Don Wells, Martin Fowler, big names, huge names in the industry.
They all signed the manifesto,
and they were So these guys were really onto something. And a lot of what they came up with here in Extreme Programming just permeate every framework that we touch.
So because all of these guys working together on the Agile Manifesto, it should be no surprise if you've looked at the Agile Manifesto and you look at the values and principles that it upholds, that some of the values and principles reflected in XP are near identical. Mm-hmm. In XP, they say communication, simplicity, feedback, working with your customer, being courageous and being respectful. Mm-hmm. Those are their key values. Mm-hmm. So communication, software development relies on strong communication between your customer, what do they want, and the team that's building it. Mm-hmm. Simplicity, it's the work not done. It's
the work not done.
It's doing only the work that needs to be done. What is the simplest thing that will work? Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting the feedback from the customer to say, hey, are we building you the right thing? Yes, no, and then
these guys really came, really defined, the right thing at the right time.
Right. Yeah. So the big thing we need to talk about is the practices.
Yeah. So I mean, however, back in the '90s, when this Chrysler program was going on, and they came up with these ideas, they are still very strong, highly encouraged industry best practices with regard to engineering. So I mean, they've stood the test of time. So let's talk about some of those.
So as we start talking about some of these practices, if you've watched our Scrum video or if you ever worked on a Scrum team, this is all going to sound really familiar to you. It's again, I think this is where some of the blending of ideas and the false attribution tends to come from, because they have some overlap, but there are some deviations. But when it comes to how the team should operate together, XP says that the best way to communicate information is a face-to-face conversation. The whole team, to include the business folks, the customer, the developers, anyone who's tracking the project, testers, everyone. The entire cross-functional team should sit together to be able to have a face-to-face conversation, be able to transmit that knowledge to each other. And they should be excited. They should be energized about their work, and they should be upbeat.
Yeah, so they really made it a point to call out face-to-face communication is huge. Communication is huge. I think there's always been this like kind of inside joke in engineering circles that engineers might not be the best communicators, right? So they made it a point to call it out. And we still make a point to call it out, right? Whether it's, regardless of the framework that we're working in, that the team needs to talk to each other, right? So this is one of the things that they put right up at the top of the list. Hey, sit together, work together, talk to each other. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal. What else?
One of the other things that being together with your whole team enables is this massive concept that some teams love and some teams love to hate. It's pair programming. Now, pair programming is this concept of two individuals working together, the same monitor, keyboard. One person is typing, one person is like watching over the shoulder, and they tend to have a similar or different background, but they're learning and helping each other as they're co-developing.
So yeah, so that whole co-developing thing. So it's not like you can't have two people pounding on the same keyboard, right? But they do fulfill functions that would normally be like phased or some kind of a linear approach. So the concept is if I'm coding and you're looking at what I'm coding, you're actually giving me a code review
on the fly
right there, real time. We could be talking about maybe some of the logic. If I'm done and I have a laptop and we're sitting right next to each other, and you check it in, I could maybe you wrote the test first, and we'll talk about test first development because I love how they define it. But we could be going back and forth, working and accomplishing a lot of the things that need to get done before we consider it done, right? So yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, and pair programming is an XP thing. It's not a Scrum thing.
It is an XP thing.
It's not a Kanban thing. But again, there are people out there who say, we're not Scrum unless we do pair programming. But that's when you start getting into some of those hybrid models. But
yeah,
if you're pair programming, you're working together with your whole team, and your whole team is co-located in the same spot, and you're doing code review on the fly, and you're doing. So let's talk test first programming. Because one of the other things that we need to talk about is continuous integration, continuous deployment. Well, continuous integration for sure. That is explicitly called out.
Oh yeah.
In XP, but that enables continuous development, which is big in a lot of the newer models like the DevOps, the DevSecOps.
So again, forerunner to the DevOps philosophy, right?
XP started it all.
XP started it, with test-driven development, test-first development. Same thing. So the story goes.
Right.
You write your test knowing it's going to fail. You run your test that you just wrote knowing it's going to fail.
It should fail.
it's going to fail.
Right.
You just wrote it.
Right.
You haven't written any code yet.
To fail.
So now you write your code so that the test doesn't fail. Right? And this is a continuous process that, it will continue to run, it will continue to be tested. But where the continuous integration aspect comes in is now that you're integrating this code that has passed its test, is it going to break once you integrate it with other existing code? And so you test that as well, right?
And this also, because if I'm doing my test first development, right, and I'm checking in my test as we're going, and things are breaking, but we're developing it in small incremental steps. And we're not even talking whole user stories or features at this point. We're talking test case, block of code, checking it in increments, right? We're talking really, really small, maybe like a single line of code to 10 lines of code, incremental build.
Yeah.
But
functions or objects, right? It depends on what it is that you're writing.
Well, this allows for continuous refactoring, though.
Well, refactoring is another concept that they introduced. But let's just point out that then and still today, a lot of developers will write code first, then test code, then fix broken code, right? And then test it again, and then until that process is passed. So do not confuse refactoring with fixing broken code, because that term is often used with fixing broken code, given that write code first, test, fix broken code, test again. That is refactoring, but that's not what they meant here.
No, refactoring here means keeping things simple, reducing the complexity of code, making it more efficient, optimizing it, following the simplicity process, that core value of XP, to try to reduce the amount of errors that could be present in a system, making it more robust, more scalable, while optimizing the whole, using a little bit of systems thinking there.
Right. Well, the less code that you have, for those of you who are, in engineering or development, the less code that you have in your production environment is, there's less security risks, there's less overhead, it's more efficient, run and execute a little bit faster. So it's good practice.
Right. And on that, continuous integration is really big here. And because they stress continuous integration, they have this golden rule, if you will, of a 10-minute build. Once your code is pushed and merged, it should take no longer than 10 minutes to fully build and be in a deployable state. So they're saying if you're constantly integrating code and it's taking 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to do a full build through whatever pipeline you have in place, it's really going to hamper your continuous integration efforts, because it's taking
and it introduces a lot of risk, right? So,
because you're going to be pushing code less often.
You're going to be pushing more code less often, right? So, that whole process is now you're introducing the opportunity for things to get missed, and so you're introducing risk, right? So, that's one way to reduce it.
Right.
What else you got?
Something else that came about in XP, which we see in Scrum, almost every single Scrum team does it, is the concept of user stories.
Yeah.
User stories are an XP practice. It's not even a value. It's not something that they say maybe you could do it. It is in XP, it is the thing that you should do. You should use user stories. That is what they say you should do. And
they in XP they came up with the concept of the story. They didn't call it a user story per se. That became a Scrum thing, the user story. But yeah, the story, it was meant to be a simple approach to, hey, we need to talk about this. Here you go.
Right. So the user story, right, it's following the needs of the customer. Right? It's not, as a developer, I need, it's does your customer need?
Mhm.
What are you delivering for your customer? And that is delivered in weekly cycles or quarterly cycles, which we would know as our increments or our iterations.
Right.
But
That's the weekly cycle. So the weekly cycle is their vernacular for an iteration or a sprint, right? That's the cadence, right? Your weekly cycle in XP. Quarterly cycle?
XP says it is synonymous to a release.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not utilizing the continuous deployment or continuous delivery and you're still doing roll-up releases, that might be more where this is heading. But if you're using CI, continuous integration, with CD, you wouldn't see that here.
Yeah, so back in this time, it wasn't CI/CD, it was just CI.
Right.
Right? So they were still planning on delivering quarterly in this particular construct.
Right.
Okay, so what else you got?
One of the things that I tend to do with the Scrum teams when I was running Scrum teams was build in a little slack. And XP likes that concept as well. So they're saying that if you're going to have a team that has a known ability to deliver, let's say, 5 items of work in an iteration or a sprint or whatever it is you're calling it, one of those items might be low priority that you can just toss to the side if life gets too crazy, right? You build in a little buffer, you build in a little wiggle room. You're not saying that life is going to be so crazy that you're pulling weekends and holidays, because XP says it's going to be no more than a 40-hour work week. They really want it to be less than a 40-hour work week.
Right. So elsewhere it's called the sustainable pace, right?
Right.
You've heard that term.
They do say sustainable pace, but they're calling it
The 40-hour work week.
Right.
Well, actually, I believe their reference to Slack is to make sure that you don't exceed your 40-hour work week. Then, so that you don't overcommit or introduce risk by saying, yeah, I'm going to take all of this on, and I'm pretty sure I can get that done. So let's just say that I can absolutely get this much done. But in other terms, in other frameworks, we call it stretch items. So the stretch item in this framework is called Slack. So we'll have some work, low priority stuff, relatively less complex, that's ready to go, so that, if I have time, if I got everything done that I needed to get done, then I can pull in some of these little onesie-twosie things. If I can't get it done, no big deal. I don't have, room to pull those things over. So that's kind of the concept of Slack in this planning concept that they had.
Right. So in terms of practices, that really covers, the core tenets of XP. You got incremental design and approach that is driven by user stories, which is customer facing, which you're going to deliver in your weekly cycles or your quarterly releases, which is driven by a team that is co-located and everybody's talking and working together, working in pairs, utilizing a test first methodology, which is being constantly checked in, constantly being refactored and optimized. And the ultimate goal is working software for the customer, which the customer is now a role on the team. And that is a pretty big deviation from Scrum, in the sense that the product owner is supposed to know what the customer wants in Scrum and be the voice of the customer. But now they're saying the customer should be on site in that same co-located space with the team. The customer should be very involved. And there's pros and cons to that. I'm sure. I would likely argue more pros than cons.
Yeah. So that's that. Again. So this particular group of people. Now, mind you, again, they're working at Chrysler, right? So though that the customer is a role here, the term developer is used as instead of the team. And the developer in this case is anybody. It doesn't matter what your field of expertise is. If you're part of this, you're a developer.
Right.
That's your role. But these guys felt, because they were engineers, that they should be, very integrated, face to face with that customer. That's very system engineering, systems thinking, system approach. So we get a lot of that here. The engineers, there's no middleman. There's no other representative. There's no other. It's I want to talk to the customer directly.
Because the customer gets to say what the system should do. They get to make all the decisions. So it's made in as real time can be when a customer is making decisions on what they want their system to do and be capable of.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm sure it really shortens the timeline on decision making.
Absolutely.
And it allows for rapid prioritization of work items and whatever way they manage their backlog.
Right. Adjustments.
Right.
And not to kick a horse when it's down or beat it when it's down, but as they're writing the test based on what they believe the requirement to be, and so they're writing whatever code in this case so that it passes. They are really truly in this case, and this is why folks who are really truly familiar with this framework, you have to scratch your head as in why isn't everyone doing this? Because we want to deliver value to our customers, right? Mm-hmm. Value is not realized if it isn't working. You didn't deliver value. You delivered something that's broken. And so this framework specifically, builds in that quality, which we keep saying in the other frameworks. But if you're not doing this, if you're not reducing that risk, and if you're not reducing the number of defects that escape into your production environment, whatever that is, then you're not delivering value. So, if you're not doing this, you need to revisit your industry best practices.
And when we say customer, and this can be an internal customer that is to the company, or it can be an external customer. Mm-hmm. So in the case of a contract organization that is utilizing XP, we would need, whoever we're contracting with, whatever business we're engaged with, to give us a dedicated customer, right? So it's not necessarily the same as a product owner, where a product owner is to the team, where a customer can be from any number of different areas, mm-hmm. as long as they can say, this is what we needed to do.
Yeah, whoever it was at the time, where when they were coming up with this theory or this concept, they had access to the people that were calling the shots, making the decisions. I think that's pretty obvious. So
your comment of value to a customer is going to be different for each customer. So, mm-hmm. Value management, expectation management is going to differ customer to customer. You don't have the same values as I do, right? Well, in terms of what brings me value.
Uh-huh.
So, if I had a software development team working with me, I would likely have different requirements and outcomes than, say, you would, and they would need to talk to me to understand that if I was their customer. But I once heard it said that we know value when we see it. Yeah. So when it's that gray of we know value when we see it, and we know value when it's not working, or we realize the value of once we've lost it. Mm-hmm. I mean, anyone at work who's ever lost access to their email server, well, there goes all the value. You had your email server go down. Now you can't work for the day, and it was valuable until it wasn't, but maybe you took it for granted. So value is going to be different everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So what else we got?
So you talked about the developer.
Mm-hmm.
They call project managers or scrum masters on these teams trackers, and that's kind of what they're doing. They're tracking work items. They're managing the
metrics.
The metrics, and then XP specifically says if you're new to XP, you should have a coach. So they don't see the Scrum Master as the tracker and coach. It is two separate roles. So you have somebody managing the project, and then you have somebody, well, not necessarily managing the project because it's
Right.
a team's.
The tracker is truly tracking progress through the metrics and the reports, escape defects, things like that. So that's the tracker is focused on what the team is actually accomplishing.
Right.
Right.
And the coach is training.
Well, the coach is again. So, and it's my opinion of the Scrum Master. It's my belief that so in Scrum, the Scrum Master role was created to help people learn this new thing called Scrum, right? And to get them through that, all those behavioral changes and learn how to be agile in Scrum. These guys said the same thing, except they call it a coach. Let me help you understand these concepts and all of these principles and all of these different things that we're doing. This coach is going to help you, customer, tracker, developer. Here's what all this is.
Right.
Here's what we're doing.
Ideally, somebody in the coaching position would have been through it before, know the pain points,
Yep.
can walk you through, guide you through these issues, and be your guide, your Sherpa. Say, hey, we're at point A. You're looking to be at point B. Let's figure out how to do this together.
Yeah. So, and to my knowledge, this is the first use of the word coach in our Agile. In terms of as a role in any of these frameworks, this is where that was introduced. So.
Yep. So, just to kind of sum it all up. XP is a set of engineering practices like we talked about that, got 5 simple values, got a handful of practices that, they really are not attributed to any other framework, certainly not Scrum. So if they do sound familiar, that is why Scrum and XP tend to be used in a hybrid fashion very often, most of the time without the awareness of the people even engaged in that hybrid model. But XP is great, and it still continues to be used throughout the entirety of the software industry. And if you didn't catch it, it is the forerunner, culturally, philosophically, really, to DevOps, which
is coming up next.
We're going to talk about next.
And I think that wraps up Extreme Programming for today. Thank you for watching our video. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next video.